next speaker here, Fred Zao. Frederick, or Fred as he's known to his friends, is a fourth generation business owner who was born in the East and educated in the West, actually at Michigan State. And he is chairman of his family business, IMCPAA. And in 1995, he transformed the business from a traditional shipping company to a diverse multinational conglomerate. I think the company's over 100 years old, by the way. Like you, he's someone who's not afraid to push boundaries in business or in life. In his case, he founded Family Business Network Asia and served on the board of Family Business Network International, where he inspired the exploration of family businesses' role within the global system. He started his research in 1995 into sustainability and modernity, and eventually into Eastern wisdom in particular, Chinese esoteric traditions, Western science, and the paradigms of conscientiousness and evolution. So he brings insights from both his very much practical experience and his cultural inheritance and knowledge of the Eastern paradigms of the Tao, the Confucius and Buddhist practices, and a real experience on applying them in the future. And if we were looking about cultural inheritance, I think that we should be spending a lot of time looking at the millennia-long history of the great Chinese cultures, Taoism, Confucianism, which have just a spectacular array of developments, of historical developments, intertwining threads relative to law, science, medicine, and all the rest that have created a loom, a rich soil of cultural continuity for this, in fact, this kind of mystical state that you mentioned, this higher infused culture. So Fred Zao, thank you so much. I see the sun on the horizon over your shoulder. I think that's a good image for which us all to greet you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, unlike the other two speakers, are certificates and books. The background, I have the sunset.
and a new book just coming out, co-written with your fellow speaker here, Irvin. Tell us, what is it? What are we missing? What's the inheritance? Because all traditions now, as my own spiritual teacher Adi Dal once said, we may live in a place and we're responsible to that place, but the cultural inheritances of the world belong to us all in common. So in some sense, we're all Confucians and Jews and all the rest of it today. What about the inheritance of our Asian sisters and brothers, not only in China, but beyond? What is useful for that new paradigm and all that?
Well, you know, the new paradigm, first of all, crosses between physics and metaphysics, and thus demystified all the stories behind it into something that is more understandable in the scientific context. And of course, the science is now moving into just one science because of all the cross-disciplinary integration in this integrated period. Eventually we landed into the quantum paradigm and the science of consciousness in life, which is already happening. And in China, it always focused on this, because unlike many people criticize, hey, the Chinese does not have philosophy. And indeed, the Chinese do not have philosophy. Chinese, long ago, before this concept, even philosophy don't exist, because they accepted the Tao, they understand the yin and yang and the hexagon, and that was before writing was created. And it is always a systemic understanding of interpretation of alignment to Tao, and the ultimate aspiration or the ultimate goal of all Chinese, unlike the Indian, is called mukti, freedom, right? The Chinese called unification, to be one with heaven or with God or whatever you call it. And that actually, the heaven is inside us. So that oneness is the foundation through the Tao, which is the evolutionary energy that created this material form. And long they know, especially in Buddhism, this is an illusion of form. This is just a form. And the Chinese know it is energy actually gather together to form. So they're actually early quantum scientists, actually, in the paradigm. And the life science of consciousness has always been in China. Now, it goes through cycles too, just like any energy. And so the Chinese actually matured all its wisdom way before Exo era. And in the Exo era, they start consolidating, like Lao Tzu and Confucius, into studies, into structure, into teaching. And by Han Dynasty, they are already consolidated all. From there is no more wisdom from China. It's only recycling into the cycle. So by Song and Ming and Song dynasty, the cycles has already gone down because the Tang dynasty is an opening, very free to integrate on a global basis. So by Cultural Revolution, that's the last nail of the death of the foreign. And now China is repositioning. Unlike Mao, which is really try to unify China again under socialism, and Deng Xiaoping, which is really focusing on the effectiveness, the famous saying of black cat, white cat, the one catch. The mouse is a good cat. That development is the only, tangible reasoning, and to get China out of poverty. Now China is out of poverty, and Xi Jinping is a third worldview. And in this is no longer a development. His focus is cultural revitalization. He understands the quality of the people is the quality of the nation. And China never had a locational concept nation. And you can see all the problem with the Islamic and stuff like that. They all about the Han culture as a foundation of the nation. And so therefore people are called not Chinese people, but Han people, because it's cultural specific. So the continuity always is deep into the thinking, despite of different regime and different concept that have been driving. And so while China is heavily affected by similar material worldview, this deep tradition that is existing in most of China, because it is mostly just farming state to 40 years ago, that it is still practiced a lot, and it's existing in this living culture, although it is not talked about in the political setting. Now today is different. This new direction of China, which declare for the destiny of humanity, which because we have sustainability, we should revitalize the worldview. And the worldview is a very traditional one. One is the one that always the highest one, which is the spiritual practice of become one inside us, so we can express the dual world of the material separation in the proper way, and back to the internal oneness, which is the real world, and starting from that place to express ourselves in the dualistic world. The second one is a harmonious work towards among nation. And the third one is a view of harmony and collaboration among diversity in society. And the third one is a morality towards goodness. He's already developing, calling people to believe this Chinese characteristic, which is of course the worldview, important because that creates a culture. Chinese characteristic, socialistic market economy. And of course, the market economy, socialistic means the market economy serves the socialistic good, and therefore much more regulations needed away from making sure that personal goods, personal gain is not at a sacrifice, and that the personal market economy is really serving the good of the market. And they call on people to have confidence in this, confidence in the new direction, confidence in the traditional culture, and confidence in themselves. And this confidence in themselves, the Chinese, comes very much in the Buddhist tradition, where it says, we are all knowing already. We are totally sufficient with wisdom. And from there, we come the natural state of confidence. It just comes because we know. And so, therefore, it'd be interesting to see how politics unfold in real life as China developed this paradigm, a quantum paradigm, which directly relates to the Chinese paradigm almost directly, and now going to revitalize it. And then it is a next cycle. And again, the Chinese Buddhism and thing already talk about the coming of this new era, the next EXO era, and therefore a lot more awakening is going to happen because the energy of Earth have shifted, the equinox have shifted, and human beings are going to awaken. And so in China, this particular thing is happening. And I think sooner than 8 years, which is the latest prediction by England, that China will be the biggest economy on Earth. And now more saying is that it will come faster after the virus. And so I think that the development in China would be a very interesting to watch, where they are now revitalizing the traditional culture in a modern context, and see how that will be a modern expression of this traditional continuity and this cycle of death and birth of the Chinese culture in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. That brings up the question, are we hearing about an ideal, a prospective ideal, but looking at recent history with China and its own relationship to traditional cultures, the Tibetan, what can sometimes is described as actually a genocide, whatever else can be said about it, the savaging of Tibetan culture for decades, and now more recently, the clear suppression of the indigenous Muslim culture, the Uyghur culture, Islamic culture, raises the question as to, are we talking about a set of professed ideals being completely counter to actual practices, or am I missing something about that?
Absolutely. It's like the Western democracy. Can you call it democracy? It's a system. We will talk about it, right? So there's a big difference between ideology and practice, but the evolution continues. And it is when the practice get corrupted gradually. So China, for example, wow, we're really polluting, really backwards. But they become the biggest spender in environmental protection and the biggest spender in technological advancement. And the latest declaration is they said science and technology belong to humanity and not belong to anyone else. And so they are making progress as well. And I will see that in the 21st century, they need a new expression of harmonious coexistence. And this is part of the systemic change of expression of how they would do laws and things like that in the future. Now, Chinese are very good in using economic systemic change into workings as well. And so we shall see how it unfolds.
So this is really an interesting line here through Arthur to you, and I think on coming on to Irvin. The sociologist Peter Berger talked about, in order to have spiritual renewal in any culture, there need to be what he called plausibility structures, actual practices and discussions that circulate deeply in the culture that bring alive not only the ideals or ideas about oneness, but actual manifestations of it. If I get sick anywhere in the world, I know I can go to a local Chinese herbal shop, and very likely in the back of that store, there's going to be a little old man or little old woman who's going to look at my tongue, take my pulses, and give me a formula for a bunch of exotic herbs that I'm going to take home and boil down. And my experience has been it's some of the best medicine you can have on earth. And it's just one of many spectra of the manifestations of the Tao and of Chinese culture that have created this kind of great loom. And I know the same thing exists in Tibetan culture and elsewhere, in Indian culture, elsewhere in Asia. In Europe, that dimension of kind of the manifestations of the ultimate being stepped down or translated into health practices, political practices, marriage practices, cultural practices, didn't really survive. So the question we have is, I have for you two is, how are we going to strengthen these plausibility structures, move them into culture and all the practical areas that Nafiz Ahmed was identifying at the end of his talk: food, agriculture, medicine, transportation, and so on, infusing the higher vision, the Tao, as you say, the spirit, we might say, the Gnostic vision, into the media of ordinary life, so that it allows our human family, our human community, to be elevated in its vision, to see that this is a living psychophysical cosmos in practical terms, that there is a living energy, the chi, the Tao, that flows through all beings, that animates us, and that requires our participatory responsibility. It's not just a drug or a pill. It requires a growth process, and culture is then redefined, not as a consumerist event for passive people of accumulation, but a participatory process of, like you say, harmonization, mutual engagement, sacrifice, love, all those aspects of, again, the Tao. How do we bring this into life, so that they infuse and uplift our culture, so that we do start to have this true parapolitics, this new paradigm?
Well, I'm actually writing my next book called Hindsight 2040, which talk about a vision, possible vision, and the trend that leads to that, and how it may happen in transition. But we all know, as you said earlier, we evolve against challenges or perceived challenges. And so therefore, without challenge, we have no evolution in this form, in the human form. And culture, the continuity, you have to take out what is the essence of the culture, right? Culture is how we live, and worldview create culture. We don't judge too much the form, and cultural continuity is its essence, not its form. And with technology, many forms change. Now, there's a trend in China, the people wearing clothes from the Han Dynasty. It was totally impractical. It's long, it's dragging along the floor and all that. Well, that's not cultural continuity. Recently we had a work that's done. What is the Chinese concept of beauty, right? And so when you go down into the essence of it, the Chinese beauty is an expression of what actually the Greek tradition is. What is true is good and beautiful. And so the creation of beauty or design on everything in the state of being true, which is when you're not distorted by your desire and everything, then your state of meditation, your state of calmness and stillness, and in stillness, you will find your God. And there you'll find your wisdom in the Chinese tradition. There you create what you see in your inner self into the creation process. And so people share externally. And so I think that the so-called continuity of what's good and what's bad, it's a dualistic mindset that we have to put aside when we examine some of these evolutionary issues, because those are just projections, right? Those are just our state of mind projection. It's dualistic in nature, it's judgmental in nature. And I think we will be definitely necessary to move. We will not get out of projection, but we will be aware that we're always projecting. And that is the law, basically. It's a holographic cosmos with different dimensional projecting, and we are still projecting. And our state of awareness decide how we project. That is actually the core of Chinese, both Taoist and the Buddhist tradition. So I hope that this explains some of my point.